Hi, my name is Anushree Alva, and I'm the CEO of Adhyayan Quality Education Foundation. We are a 3-year-old not-for-profit organization in India that seeks to build the capacity of leaders in the public school ecosystem to improve the quality of learning at scale through effective governance. So before I dive into what it is that Adhyayan Foundation does, I wanted to paint you a picture to give you a little bit of context on what education in India really is like. So here's a picture of my grandfather's family in the late 1930s in rural southern India. So at this point in time, India is still a British colony, education is exclusive. One has to make quite the journey to get to school. So my grandfather's family was a family of farmers. They did not own any land. They really struggled to make ends meet. And he walked about 3 miles every day in the scorching heat to get to school. And that was the school in his nearest village. And the school looked something like this, where children sat under trees or in makeshift structures. They would repeat after their teacher in a chorus. They would copy whatever she wrote on the board or dictate it from the textbook. So now fast forward 100 years later, the public education system in India continues to cater to extremely marginalized communities that do not have the ability to pay for an education. And the typical profile of a parent who sends their child to these schools would be that of an agricultural or construction worker. However, if you walk into one of these classrooms, it almost feels like deja vu. While the infrastructure has become significantly better with increased government spending and enrollment has risen to about 97%, and there's a school now in every village. But what remains the same is the same old textbook, the same old blackboard, the same chanting in a chorus, the same rote memorization. And this in spite of the fact that the government now spends nearly 4% of India's GDP on education, and 1/3 of philanthropic capital in India is invested in education. And this has only been rising for the last decade. However, according to the 2018 ASAR report, learning outcomes have been on the decline over the last decade, with over 50% of Indian students in primary and middle schools being unable to read a second grade text. So what's the missing link here? Like, why has education not improved at scale and sustainably in spite of all this rising investment? And according to us, the missing link is governance. The newly released National Education Policy in India mandates 21st century learning. That is, can students think critically? Can they work collaboratively? Can they communicate clearly? And in order to be able to achieve this, you need teachers who can facilitate such classrooms. And this is where you see all government spending, philanthropic capital, as well as like NGO or not-for-profit efforts going towards. But where we feel like all of this falls apart is at the level of monitoring. So when a government school inspector walks into a school, this is the conversation he or she has with the school leader. So what is the attendance today? Has the midday meal been served? Have you completed your syllabus? Instead, if the conversation was this, let's discuss the evidence of your impact. Let's focus on your teaching and learning. Let's see how you can improve. Let's see what support I can provide you. Let's see how we can document your best practice. You would see a transformed public schooling system. At Adhyayan Foundation, we realized that if this crisis in education quality has to be solved at scale and sustainably, we need to strengthen the ecosystem of leaders. So we work really hard only with leaders in the public school system. So first, we get the state and its leadership to agree upon a shared vision of school quality measured using a quality framework that focuses on teaching and learning and not just infrastructure and administration. On your screen, you see one such metric, one such framework that is used by the government, and there are many like this. We then support a state in evaluating their schools against this framework so that everyone develops a common and measurable language of quality. We then work with school complex leaders. So what you see on your screen right now on the left, that is Sarveda. She is the principal of a high school and oversees about 8 primary schools around her. So that is her complex, and she's their complex leader. So we build her capacity through workshops and in-field support to visit schools and to look for evidence of progress. So you can see her sitting with the school leader, wherein she would have observed his classroom, spoken to the students, reviewed his documentation, and then she sits with him, discusses this evidence, and talks about where he's doing well and what his next steps are to get better. She also organizes monthly meetings with all the primary schools around her to get them to discuss their challenges and showcase evidence of their progress. And we build her capacity to do all of this. This data is then sent to a level above, which is that of the district. where we worked really closely with inspectors to get them to shift the paradigm from a focus on administrative tasks and exams to focusing on evidence of learning in the classroom. We support them to observe classrooms like you can see in the picture. They go to the lowest performing schools, review data across their district, and work towards providing teachers with targeted professional development based on their needs. We then support state level officials to review the data once a quarter to measure the effectiveness of the resources they have invested, as well as to begin to address larger systemic challenges, but with a lens of providing support and incentives rather than penalizing schools, which tends to be the norm in India. So far, we have worked across 2 states in India, Goa and Delhi, and here's the shift we see after our intervention. So before the intervention, we see states where each department has its own priorities. They don't talk to each other. They collect data in silos. The 10th grade exam results become their only measure of quality. And all teachers are provided with one-size-fits-all training a few times in the year, no matter what their specific needs are. Post the intervention, what we see is that all stakeholders in the ecosystem share one common language of school quality linked to a measurable quality framework, and they review this consistently and they use it to provide needs-based support to schools. Before the intervention, what you would see at the district and the level of the complex is a focus on administrative tasks and leaders who are very compliance-oriented. After the orientation, what you start seeing is inspectors and complex leaders who begin to visit schools, review evidence of learning, they talk to children, they extend targeted support, and build a culture of improvement and peer learning among school leaders. So here you see an inspector who oversees about 150 to 200 schools, and because of his constant intervention and support to all the complex leaders, a vast majority of the schools under him showed a measurable improvement. Before the intervention, we see that rote memorization for exams is the norm in most classrooms. But after the intervention, we see classrooms where children work collaboratively, have opportunities to develop their communication and critical thinking skills, and become independent learners, where their learning becomes more practical, where they begin to work with their peers and support each other, as well as present back their thoughts to their teachers and their peers. In Goa, over the last 2 years, 70% of the 824 schools showed a measurable improvement on the quality framework chosen by the state. Being a not-for-profit, our funding model is a mixture of contributed revenue as well as fee-for-service, though under the Indian income tax law, only 20% of our income can come from fee-for-service. The value proposition we offer departments of education is the ability to get real-time data on the status of quality, as well as setting up systems and processes that enable them to drive improvement using data. What you see on the right is that while the government spends about $273 per student per year, with just an additional $4 in our intervention, we can assure significant improvement in quality at scale that will be sustainable beyond our exit. With large foundations and trusts, we enable them to drive reform at scale that is sustainable. And in a 4-year funding cycle, like you can see on your right, the cost to them drops to about a fourth by the 3rd year. And this is primarily because we focus on building the capacity of existing government personnel and reduce our own staff involved in implementation. We also provide small education not-for-profits low-cost tools and training to assess their impact continuously. A typical impact assessment would cost them about $10,000, but we offer the service at about $6,500. So now I wanted to take you through the story of our growth. In 2017, we had only worked with about 25 schools and raised $13,000, impacting 25,000 students. Between 2018 and 2020, we were able to onboard an influential donor in the Indian ecosystem called Tata Trusts, and were able to extend our intervention to 6,444 schools across 2 states and raise $204,000, impacting 2.8 million students. By 2023, we want to impact about 3.6 million students in 5 states, raising $517,000. And by 2025, we want to impact about 10 million students and raise $1 million. This year, we were also able to onboard the ATE Chandra Foundation, which is another very influential donor in the Indian ecosystem. As part of our strategic initiative this year, We will also be launching an effective governance campaign across 10 states that aligns with the newly released national education policy. The main outcome for us is to be able to convert one state at the end of the year and onboard them, but also to continue to cultivate the rest over the next few years and build advocacy around the urgent need for effective governance in education. So finally, now I come to the place of talking about why us, right? Why invest in us? So the first is that we have strong domain expertise. The executive director of Adhyayan has been in the space of education for the last 30 years, has worked across various stakeholders like government, donors, schools, the parent community, and is also an Ashoka Fellow. I have been in the space of education for the last 11 years, and I'm a graduate of Teachers College at Columbia University. We also have a proven model that improves school quality at scale by accelerating the effectiveness of the entire education ecosystem and really expediting the timeline towards improvement. If I talk about why now, the first is that the National Education Policy was just released by the Ministry of Education, wherein they have publicly committed to wanting to upgrade the quality of schools in a very short time frame, and effective governance is one key pillar to achieving that. The second is a really scary statistic released by UNICEF recently, which is that 24 million children are predicted to drop out of school. Most developing countries have spent the last decade bringing children into school, and this year we risk to lose all that work in just a matter of months. And the World Bank also released a recent study that predicts that India stands to lose about 420 billion in future earnings because of reduced learning levels. And there's a real strong need to drive collective impact at this point in time. So finally, what I would say is join us. Today, there are over 200 million children attending school in India. To give you a little bit of perspective on that number, that's 4 times the size of a country as big as France. That's how many children we have in India going to school. So here's an opportunity for you to show the world that if we invest in effective governance, the crisis in quality of education can be solved in a country as complex and as vast as India. And if we can do it in a country like India, we can do it anywhere else. Personally, I don't want to spend yet another decade wondering why, in spite of all this investment, a 5th grader can't read or understand a 2nd grade text. So here's me inviting you to be a part of a movement that will enable 200 million children to become resilient future citizens of the world. Thank you.